If you look at television now, we are getting some incredible TV, especially in the prequel space. We have Andor. We have Alien Earth, which is... Jury's still out for me if I love it or not, but it's at least really interesting, and every episode is full of compelling ideas. I do not come away from my time with that show feeling like I've been cheated out of something, like intelligence. It's combining the idea of artificial life and what are the bioethics behind that, what are the ethics behind bringing alien life forms to Earth and experimenting on them. There's a lot of corporate greed, which has always been a part of the Alien franchise. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. So, and then if you think of one of the great prequels of all time, it would have to be Better Call Saul, done by the creators of Breaking Bad, one of the greatest TV shows ever. Better Call Saul is an extraordinary achievement as a prequel. And one of the things that all three of these shows have in common is the thought and the intelligence. Star Trek has been with us for 60 years. Now, here's the thing. I am not here to tell you whether or not Star Trek, the original series, or as we would call it, Star Trek, is good or bad. I don't have to tell you that because we're 60 years on and we're still getting Star Trek. What kind of Star Trek? Well, we'll talk about that. But history has decided whether it's good or bad, and history has spoken. And for me, I've seen Star Trek grow and evolve throughout my entire life. I mean, it literally started before I was born, but I was born soon after. And I became a fan of it in the early 70s when I was a wee lad, 5-year-old wee lad. And since I've watched it grow and I've watched it evolve. And what's interesting for me is I was there almost at ground zero. But certainly when Star Trek went into strip syndication in 72 and became the phenom that it is, the first Star Trek convention was also in that year. So it's really interesting when people tell me now online, I mean, they don't know me really, but, well, don't watch it, it's not for you. Well, it's been for me for most of my life. Until it became a horribly written shadow of its former self. An embarrassment to anyone with any modicum of intelligence or intellect about them. It's an embarrassment. It's become an embarrassment, and Strange New Worlds might be the biggest embarrassment of all because it's hiding under a cloak of respectability. But Star Trek used to have sincerity. Even when episodes weren't great, like in Spock's Brain was not great, they were sincere in what they were trying to do. They weren't breaking character. They weren't breaking the fourth wall. They weren't falling back on modern-day colloquialisms in the future, in the 23rd century. And if you look at something like Spock's Brain, I'm not going to argue that it's a great episode of Star Trek. But I will say that when you're watching it, as goofy as it might be, with the women being the givers of pain and delight and the men sort of used for breeding stock whenever necessary. And then there was this ancient civilization that provided this teaching machine. There was enough in there that was thought-provoking and compelling. I mean, having Spock walk around brainless was a little, brainless. But it was it had some interesting ideas. But more importantly, you believed. I mean, certainly as a kid, before I was as discerning as I am now, clearly, I didn't know the difference, as a young whippersnapper. I just loved Star Trek. But what Star Trek allowed me to do is I got older and continued to watch the episodes. They resonated more with me. There was a lot more in them that I hadn't understood as a child. But as I watched them, especially growing up, the Star Trek franchise grew with me. Now, we have almost 60 years of Star Trek, so we can compare and contrast. There's always been great Star Trek and not so great Star Trek. For me, the original series is about 75% good to great, with 25% not so good to good. Next Generation, I'd flip that. I'd say 25%, maybe 30% of Next Generation is absolutely great. A lot of it's good. And then probably about 25% not so good. But there's a lot more episodes. There's basically 99 more episodes of Next Gen than there is of the original series. And it goes from there. But all the way up from 66 to 2005, Star Trek was sincere. It was made by people who believed. It was made by people who really put a lot of time and effort into what they were doing. That hasn't been the case since 2009. Alex Kurtzman, who controls the franchise now at his company's secret hideout, he'd never watched an episode of Star Trek before he was hired as the co-writer on Star Trek 09. Now he runs a franchise. Director J.J. Abrams said he never liked Star Trek as a kid. Too intellectual, he said. When he went out on tub thumping on the promotional tour for Star Trek 09, he was very happy to tell everybody who would listen that he didn't like Star Trek. And yet Paramount turned it over to him. He's a flim-flam man, that J.J. Abrams. Hey, got a job, got paid millions of dollars. His company, Bad Robot, ran basically a Star Trek grift, which they're still running even to this day. Alex Kurtzman now runs the franchise. He'd never seen an episode before 2009, and if you watch Star Trek Into Darkness, which he co-wrote, it's very apparent that he'd never watched Star Trek. I don't know. Is it valuable? Are people watching this? Some people like it, and I don't begrudge them. Some people's first experience with Star Trek is going to be this, which is unfortunate because like so much of our culture these days, it has been tremendously dumbed down. What we need is things that elevate. Like when I was a kid, Star Trek elevated my consciousness. It exposed me to a lot of concepts like Captain Terrell was talking about for the very first time. It instilled in me an attitude of questioning and wonder and awe that still sticks with me to this day. If I had children right now, I wouldn't let them watch Strange New Worlds. It's an insulting show that isn't about anything. It has nothing at all of relevance to say to humanity, especially today. You know, there are so many. I read the news every day. There's so much fodder for great Star Trek. Pick any news story. You know what Peter Gallagher said in The Player. You know, he just picked up a newspaper and said, "Oh, we can make a movie out of any news story." And he says, "Look, this story about underprivileged kids who get lifted up in the ghetto. You put Jimmy Smits in it, and you have a sexy sand and deliver." Well, he was right. He was right. Michael Tolkien and Robert Altman were right. And Peter Gallagher's character, you can find Star Trek episode ideas anywhere. But the writers of the show don't seem to be looking for them. Royston Bailey says, "Rob, if Star Trek was a person, what crimes would Kurtzman be guilty of? It's sad how many fans have succumbed to saying Strange New Worlds is fun." Yeah, but I think that's a product of our modern age, which is too bad. Look, I think what he's guilty of insincerity. There's no effort. You know, it's really interesting. The reason Strange New Worlds exists is because Anson Mount was the most Star Trekian character in Discovery. He shows up and it's like, oh, here's what a Star Trek character is like. And he carried with him gravitas. Look, Anson Mount is an incredible actor. I mean, if you watch Hell on Wheels, the guy's incredible. And when you watch the episode that they put on yesterday, you're like, really? You know, I mean, I understand he took time off because he wanted to spend time with his newborn and all that, which I really respect. But what these writers have done to him is, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know what to say. But they you know, season 1 had some really interesting episodes, like when they ripped off Ursula K. Le Guin. That was a pretty good episode. Wasn't great, and they should have given her credit. But Alex Kurtzman did say in an interview, yes, we were inspired by Ursula K. Le Guin. No, you stole her story without accreditation and without any money changing hands. So, yes. But that's what I would say. It's insincere, and they haven't put in the effort. It is a lackluster effort that was put in. And it's unfortunate.